So how do you make your 460 even stronger? I'm sorry, I've been quarantined, I haven't been working out. But how do you make it stronger? With more of everything. More camshaft, cylinder head, intake, and of course, more displacement. So you want to make more power from your 460? Well, rather than give you the runaround, I'm going to give you a straight scoop. Here's what we did. First thing we did was make it bigger, 557 inches. Then we added more compression, more camshaft, more cylinder head, and more intake. So let's check out the results, and unfortunately, I don't have video of the motor running, but in the background, I'm going to make some cool car noises.
We'll get things started with our 557-inch stroker tunnel around a big block Ford buildup. We need to kind of start at the beginning, and that's actually back at a very bone stock motor that we had gotten from the wrecking yard. It was a 68 high compression version of the 460, and we treated it to basically a stock kind of rebuild. We just want to make sure that it was all fresh and ready to go. So we put it back together, but with a stock head, stock cam, stock iron intake. We put a 4-barrel on it, ran it with headers, and ran it up on the dyno. And then we modified it with help from our guys at MPG Heads, and put a set of ported stock heads on it, a really good camshaft, a much better intake manifold and a carburetor. And I'll show you what those gains are so we get an idea what a modified 460 can do to put into perspective what we did on our 557 that, you know, it's even more impressive. So this was our stock 1968 high compression 460. It had the stock factory camshaft in it, as I said, had the stock cast iron intake, which really makes a lot of torque, because back in, if you hadn't seen the video where we went over this stuff in detail, check it out. I'll put a link right up here. You can see everything that happened, or you should want to check it out before you watch this video. But we'll explain everything here, so it's all good. So this was our stock motor. We ran it with a factory cast iron intake manifold. And here's what happened after we installed the performance upgrades. Now what we put on was a set of ported stock iron heads from the guys at MPG Heads, also one of their camshafts, and a big single plane Ford Racing, Ford Motorsport intake manifold from one of the crate motors, and a big Dominator solid, 4500 carburetor. Basically, the heads and cam were part of a 600 horsepower package that the guys from MPG said that, hey, if you run this cam and these heads with a good intake, it will make 600 horsepower. So I'm like, okay, fine. We'll put it on there and see what happens. And sure enough, the power output on our stock motor with headers made 349 horsepower and 492 foot-pounds. After we installed this package from the guys at MPG Heads, their cam and intake, or their cam and cylinder heads, it went up to 609 horsepower, and peak torque was all the way up to 557 foot-pounds. So you can see from the curves, that upgrade was obviously worth some fairly serious power, and those guys are true to their word. I mean, and the reason that they can tell you that is because if you've tested it 20 times and it always does kind of the same thing, you go, okay, yeah, that's a pretty good package. But this is what happens if you take a 460, and this particular one was actually bored 60 over when we put pistons in it. So it was bored, and then we had that camshaft and intake and the big single plane intake manifold and big 4500 Dominator style carburetor. So this is what happens when you make these upgrades. Now we can kind of compare these two combinations, because it's not really a good idea to compare just a stock one to a 557. So this is a stock one and a modified 460, a healthy one for over 600 horsepower. Now let's take a look and see what happened with our 557 buildup. So after demonstrating our factory power output on the 460 and then our modified power output on the 460, we decided we wanted to increase the power output by, let's say, like 50%. So we want to jump from 600 horsepower to 900 horsepower. So that's a pretty big jump in power. Now, it would be possible, I'm sure guys have done 900 horsepower with a 460 or a displacement thereabout. That can certainly be done. It takes a lot of expensive parts and a lot of RPM to make that happen. So we decided to do it the easy way. It's so easy that even I can do it. So to make more power from a 460, you need a number of things. You need more cylinder head flow. You need more camshaft. You need more intake manifold. And one of the key elements is more displacement. For any given power level, it's much easier to reach that power level with more displacement. It just makes it easier. Imagine trying to make 900 horsepower with a 1-liter motor and no boost. You probably wouldn't get there. but doing it with a 7 or 8 or 9 liter motor makes life a lot harder. And that's what we did. So lucky for us, the 460 will take a lot of bore and a lot of stroke. So we increased the combination to 4.4 bore and a 4.500 stroke. So that's a good combination. That netted us 557 inches. And remember, this was still with the stock 2-bolt 460 block. Now, to make that power, we installed a set of, a stroker assembly from Speedmaster. They had their 4.5 inch 4340 forged steel crank, and we used a set of 600-700 rods that were actually big block Chevy size, and then forged flat top pistons with valve reliefs. And we needed the valve reliefs because we were running a pretty good sized camshaft in this thing. We installed a solid roller cam that was an 800 lift. It was an 806 763 lift split, and a 275 284 degree duration split, and 110 degree lobe separation angle. So it was a fairly good sized camshaft, and again, it was a solid roller. One of the keys to the power output of this thing were the cylinder heads. Now, we installed a set of A460 heads from TrickFlow, and they have a couple of different versions, and we chose the CNC version. And to give you an idea how good these heads are, they were running a where's my valve size combination here? 2.3 inch intake valve and a 188 exhaust valve, kind of typical big block Chevy stuff. But these things flowed 465 CFM on the intake, and that's at 800 lift, and flowed 330 CFM on the exhaust. So those heads were designed to be able to have people make lots of power. Now, the other things we did was we were feeding the TrickFlow A460 heads with a TrickFlow R series single plane intake, and that single plane intake was designed for a big motor like this. So it was flanged for a 4500 series carburetor, and we installed a 1050 Dominator on that thing. We also ran, and if you take a look at this photo, you'll say, hey, what's going on here? That Ford engine has big block Chevy heads on it. And that's because the A460 heads were designed with one of two different exhaust patterns. That's either a big block Ford or a big block Chevy. So we opted to run big block Chevys just because we had more big block Chevy headers to choose from. And we used a 2 1/4 inch our dyno header, and it works really well in that combination. So the chamber size on the A460 heads allowed us to produce 12.5 to 1 with that flat top piston. And I like that combination. It was the 83 cc chamber, but I like that combination because, and I like that better than a big block Chevy, because usually a big block Chevy has a big combustion chamber and it requires a dome piston. And I like the flame travel of a flat top. Not that a big block doesn't work. If you take a look at the video, I'll go ahead and put a link up right here of our big block Chevy that was similar size and makes similar power, so you guys can compare them all you want. But a flat top piston I like, it's a good combination. So we put this combination together, and the finishing touches on this combination included a Moroso oiling system, because on these big blocks, especially when you got a lot of stroke on them, it's important to have a good oiling system. And so this Moroso piece made sure that we always had plenty of oil pressure during the run, because we revved this thing out pretty far. So let's take a look and see what our combination produced here. This is our big block Ford, big block stroker Ford. As you can see, big jump up, obviously from the stock one, and also from the modified 460. But our 557 produced 895 horsepower out at 7,000 RPM and 757 foot-pounds. So it was a pretty stellar piece. But guess what? We weren't done. Now let's take a look and see what happened when we ran NITROUS on this thing, and then when we installed a tunnel ring. Needless to say, we were really happy with the power output of our big block stroker Ford. I mean, we were real close to 900 horsepower. We got some good power going on up at the top there, out at 7,000, 895, and 757 foot-pounds. But naturally, we wanted more, for two reasons. One, because we were awful close to 900 horsepower, so you got to get over 900. You can't have like 899. You got to be over 900. But the first way, and we did this two ways. The first way was very easy. We installed a Zex perimeter plate NITROUS kit on it, and any kind of NITROUS plate makes it makes your job really easy. So here's what happened when we installed. We put 150 horsepower jetting in this thing, and you know, it picked up a ton of power. We were over 1100 horsepower up here, and then it settled into, you know, 1050. So we basically went from 900 to 1050, you know, when it was stabilized and got that big kind of spike there. But you know, it was so easy to go into 4-digit stuff with this motor because we were already starting with something that was, you know, close to 900 horsepower. Nitrous is awesome. Big inch forwards are awesome, and the combination of it is even awesomer. So now let's take a look and see what happened when we installed the tunnel ram. So let's get rid of the nitrous here. Just keep going with the fun. So next up, what we did was install, because we wanted to, obviously the nitrous is easy to make power, but what we wanted to do is get over 900 NA, you know, all motor, because that's what it's all about. So we installed the TrickFlow R-Series tunnel ram designed for these A460 heads, and then equip that with, like every big block in the world should have. It should have a tunnel ram with 2 Dominator carburetors on it, just like that big block that I was talking to you guys, big block Chevy that I was talking to you guys about. But obviously, if you take a look at these photos, it looked awesome. And as you can see here, it performed very well too. It picked up a bunch of power at the top. We ended up making almost 930 horsepower with the tunnel ram. Oddly enough, though, it's interesting that it didn't pick up the same kind of gains in the same RPM range as the comparison that we did on the tunnel ram for the big block Chevy. So I'm not sure if that's just a difference between maybe the single plane TFS intake was already a really good piece and kind of pretty well matched to this combination. Now this camshaft wasn't nearly as big as the camshaft that we ran in the big block Chevy. So you guys let me know what you think. I kind of expected to see more average power pickup with the tunnel ram. But I mean, you know, hey, it's still picked up over 30 horsepower, and who doesn't want an extra 30 horsepower? Besides, having two Dominators on tunnel ram is always awesome on any big block. So let's get to our conclusion.
Okay, guys, what do you think about the test on our big block stroker Ford? Personally, I thought it was awesome. I mean, that's the most power I've ever made on a big block Ford on a 460 base deal, and I thought it was pretty cool. And there was a lot of good things about this. I mean, I was impressed by the fact that you could use that stock 2-bolt block and go out as big as we could go, making it 557 inches. And obviously you can't do that with a production big block Chevy block, which is cool, and all the Ford guys obviously get to rub it in their face. But I also like the TrickFlow heads. I mean, those A460, especially the CNC ported versions, those things flow a ton. I mean, they flowed 465 CFM, which is a lot, and obviously enough to make big power. All we had to do was have enough compression, which we did with our combination of piston and chamber size. We had a nice flat tops in there with valve release. We had a big camshaft in it, which was more than enough. And, you know, my goal for the whole thing was to make 900 horsepower, which we ended up doing with the tunnel ram. But before we did that, when I had the single 4-barrel on there, which was a good single 4-barrel, obviously, as demonstrated by the differences in the power curves. But when we had the single Dominator on there and we got to like 895, I'm like, no, we were so close. Now it's so easy to get there with the nitrous, and, you know, that's kind of cheating. So I wanted to get there NA. So that's why we installed the tunnel ram on there. And you know how I feel about that. Every big block should have a tunnel ram, and every tunnel ram should have Dominators on it. And this one did. But guess what? This is a Ford video, but all you Chevy guys that are watching it, you totally get to take credit for this. Because you could say, yeah, look, she only made power because she had Chevy headers on her. And you could say it just like that. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Thanks for supporting the channel. I'll keep testing.